Hey kids, it's me, Tony Homeperm, the singing diva of Long Island. Now I know you're all used to seeing my interview shows, makeup tutorials, and music videos, but today I decided to try my hand at something new. What many people don't know about me is that I am a huge sci-fi and comic book fan, and especially a Star Trek fan. So what I've decided to do is a commentary video about these other things that I've always loved. Before I begin, I would like to say that I have been very inspired by another YouTube creator to do this video, Jessie Gender. Needless to say, I would not be making this video if it wasn't for her, and if you love Enterprise or Star Trek videos or sci-fi in general, you have to follow her, and I will be posting all of her information in the comments section down below. Speaking specifically about Star Trek, I have been a huge fan of all the Trek genre, starting with the original series way back in the early 1970s when it went into syndication. I can remember playing Star Trek with the other kids outside every day and then running into the house to watch the next episode on one of our local TV stations. I had my own Star Trek shirt, complete with insignia. Although I don't know why I had the yellow one, I was always Spock whenever I played Star Trek. I even had the AMT phaser, communicator, and tricorder model set that I put together myself. I've always felt that seeing Captain Kirk shirtless and sweaty pretty much solidified any doubts I might have had that I did indeed prefer boys to girls, but I digress. I remember the excitement I had when I waited online on my 15th birthday to be one of the first people to see Star Trek the Motion Picture, and of course the disappointment when it was over because it just wasn't the Trek I knew. And I had the feeling that that was going to be it for Star Trek. But that's a discussion for another time. Then of course came June 4th, 1982, Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, and suddenly Trek was back with a vengeance. Plans were put in place for more movies and even a brand new series, Star Trek: The Next Generation. Along with that came comics, books, and video games. Even more TV series came, such as Star Trek Deep Space Nine and Star Trek Voyager. The original series retired from the big screen, and the Next Gen cast took that over with success, for the most part. After Star Trek Nemesis, Trek took something of a hiatus from both movies and TV, but then started back up again with the Kelvin Universe reboot movie series, starting with a 2009 film simply titled Star Trek. This led to the new CBS All Access series Star Trek Discovery, Star Trek Picard, Star Trek Lower Decks, all of which are continuing with new seasons, along with another upcoming series, Star Trek Strange New Worlds, and even Nickelodeon is going to have a version for younger viewers called Star Trek Prodigy. And I'm sure I will be watching all of those as well. What you might have picked up on by my omission is there was one Trek series I didn't mention, and that of course is Enterprise, which also became retitled during its run as Star Trek Enterprise. Don't be alarmed, I was a fan of Enterprise, especially during its first season. I loved Scott Bakula as Captain Jonathan Archer. I had been a big fan of his from his work on Quantum Leap. I was enthralled by Jolene Blalock as T'Pol, who is most likely the sexiest Vulcan to ever appear on screen. I also can't deny that I very much enjoyed Connor Trinneer as Commander Trip Tucker, especially whenever he was shirtless in the decontamination chamber, and even more so when he was running around in his underwear trying to save the ship from the Ferengi. John Billingsley was wonderful as the ever-cheerful Dr. Phlox, which was an unexpected change from the typical salty doctors that are so prevalent on Trek. Linda Park as Ensign Hoshi Sato gave us an insight into what the average person would feel like in some of the life-threatening and nerve-wracking incidents that a starship would encounter. Because let's face it, although we watch these shows and wish we could be doing those things, if we really were there, we probably would not do so well after being kidnapped by the Xindi. Anthony Montgomery as Ensign Travis Merriweather and Dominic Keating as Lieutenant Malcolm Reed rounded out the cast, although to be honest, I was never a great fan of their characters. Reed was always a bit annoying, and I always thought he was there just to have someone with a British accent. As for Merriweather, the writers barely gave him any storylines, so there just wasn't much to be interested in. I do have to add that I thought Captain Archer's dog Porthos was adorable. What can I say? I'm an animal lover. So I watched the entire first season when it originally aired, and I watched part of the second season. And then I honestly forgot it was on TV. I remember hearing that it was being canceled at the end of the fourth season, and it was only then I recalled that it was still on. At that point, the only notable thing about Enterprise was that it didn't make it to 7 seasons, as did its predecessors, Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and Voyager. So Enterprise just quietly faded away, sort of like a distant relative that you might think about once in a blue moon. And that's how Enterprise was for me in 2005. Now let's jump to 2020, and we're all living in a strange new world where my boredom led me to sign up for a free preview of CBS All Access, where I binge-watched Star Trek Picard and the first 2 seasons of Discovery. These 2 shows reignited my fascination with Trek, and I realized that I never watched the entirety of Enterprise. It was in fact the only Trek that I had not seen every episode of. So I decided to correct that and began rewatching it, starting with the first episode. They say hindsight is 20/20, and that was true for me as I began this experiment of delving into Enterprise. I don't know why I was so much more interested in it this second time around, but I was. I enjoyed the fact that this was Starfleet in its infancy. They didn't have all the bells and whistles. Even the transporter was used only in emergency situations. Having the Vulcan High Command as an antagonistic presence was entertaining, especially as portrayed by Gary Graham as Ambassador Soval. Seeing the Andorians in major storylines was great, and Jeffrey Combs was excellent as Commander Shran. Who didn't love his antennae? What most caught my attention in the first season episodes were the stories that kind of freaked me out, because they paralleled things we're facing in the real world today. The one that stood out the most for me was Dear Doctor, where Phlox is asked to save a civilization that's been beset by a plague that seemed to be incurable. Perhaps not the best form of entertainment one wishes to watch during a pandemic, but it was a good episode nonetheless. In Detained, Archer and Merryweather are captured by the Tandarans and placed in a Suliban internment camp. They took this opportunity to show that it was only a small minority of Suliban that were undergoing genetic modifications. The majority of them were ordinary beings that just wanted to live their lives like anyone else. Seeing that there were Suliban children being held in these camps was another key moment for me, especially considering what we are still seeing in internment camps in our own country to this very day. In the second season, one of the standout issues was the episode called Cogenitor. The Enterprise crew met a race called the Vizians. The notable thing about them was that they were a race that had 3 sexes, and the third sex was androgynous, and their sole purpose was to facilitate reproduction for the other 2 sexes. They were treated more or less like pets and were not given an education. They really had no lives other than to be used for their biological necessity. Trip takes a fondness to the one cogenitor aboard the Vizian starship and secretly teaches them to read and inspires them to want a purpose in life. Of course, when all of this is found out, the Vizians are not pleased. This episode packs a wallop of an ending when Captain Archer has to read Trip the Riot Act for interfering with this other alien culture's way of life, and he reveals to Trip that the cogenitor committed suicide when they were forced to return to the Vizians. Regeneration was very entertaining as it picked up from plot threads of the First Contact movie, and the Enterprise crew had to deal with the threat of the Borg, due to a team of Starfleet researchers finding frozen Borg in the Arctic that they end up reviving. This one was more than similar to the Thing remake film from 1982, but I still liked it. Of course, for the sake of continuity, the Enterprise crew never learns exactly who or what these aliens are, and all traces of them are obliterated in the end, because otherwise, how could they be unknown to the crew of Next Generation? The second season ends with a devastating attack on the Earth that leads us into the third season's Xindi storyline that changed the format of the show from all standalone episodes to this broad tale of a quest to find the Doomsday Machine in an uncharted region of space called the Expanse. Of course, the third season also saw the title of the show changed from simply Enterprise to Star Trek Enterprise. The producers also changed the beautiful theme song and added unnecessary guitar riffs and drums to it. Yeah, I didn't care for that. One episode that stood out to me was Damage, mainly because Captain Archer literally steals the warp coil from an Illyrian spacecraft in order to replace the Enterprise's damaged coil in order to continue their mission to save the Earth. I don't think we would have ever seen Picard or Janeway go to these lengths, although Kirk had no problem stealing a cloaking device from the Romulans, so I guess there was some precedent for stealing parts. It always bothered me that they never followed up on this. It would have been nice if after the Xindi War, Enterprise would have searched for the Illyrian vessel and made amends for what they did. Of course, the third season ends on a cliffhanger with Enterprise saving the Earth from the Xindi doomsday weapon, but a consequence of that is that they get thrown back into the past and an injured Archer is found in a World War II Nazi field hospital, but with the addition of some alien Nazis because, you know, Star Trek loves Nazis. The fourth and final season begins there, with the Enterprise crew reuniting with Captain Archer, who they thought was dead, and they have to restore everything to the correct timeline, which they do. The rest of the season deals with some multi-episode stories that included the Augments and a Vulcan conspiracy that resulted in the death of Admiral Forrest. Commander Shran returns in a storyline that brings the Romulans back, which would have led into the fifth season's Romulan War, had there been a fifth season. We find out in the episode Bound that the Orion slave girls are actually not slaves and use their pheromones to control every man in their vicinity. The two-part story, In a Mirror Darkly, is one of the best mirror universe stories Trek has ever done. I have to wonder if the Emperor in Discovery is a descendant of Hoshi, since she becomes Emperor at the close of the episode. The last two-episode story, Demons and Terra Prime, show us that there is an isolationist faction on Earth that want to have all the aliens removed from the Earth. I couldn't help but shudder at how this reflected so much of the intolerance and bigotry that we're seeing today, right outside our own windows. For me, it was quite a moving experience that Enterprise, at its end, picked up on those real-world themes that I had watched in the first season. Of course, the last episode, These Are the Voyages, is probably one of the most critically savage series finales in existence. Honestly, I didn't hate it, but it was an unsatisfying end to this series. I certainly didn't like that they killed off Trip. However, we all know no one really stays dead in Star Trek, so had the series continued, I'm sure he could have been brought back somehow. The end scene with Picard, Kirk, and Archer reciting the opening episode lines was touching and bittersweet to me. It made me wonder if perhaps I had watched the show when it was originally on. Maybe it wouldn't have ended so abruptly. Of course, it really wouldn't have made a difference, but I like to think it would. As I put my final thoughts together, I've realized that I do love Enterprise, and I now rank it as one of the best Trek series that's ever been done. I highly doubt that the powers that be at Paramount would ever do anything pertaining to Enterprise again, and maybe that's a good thing. It removes the opportunity for it to be tainted. For now, for me, Enterprise will remain exactly as it was first created, almost like a starship in a bottle, preserved for all time. I hope you all enjoyed my thoughts on Enterprise. If you would like to see me do more videos of this nature, then please hit the like button, click the subscribe and notification bell, and most importantly, please leave a comment down below. I genuinely would love to know what all of you think about Enterprise. So until the next time, live long and prosper.